good day. I'm Ian Gould, and I'm presenting podcasts on behalf of the International Society for Antimicrobial Chemotherapy, otherwise known as ISAC. It's my honor to interview some of what we're calling the living legends in the field of infectious diseases, really looking at great achievements in people's careers over all aspects of infectious disease, microbiology, infection control, antimicrobial stewardship, and many, many more topics. We wanted to really showcase the great achievements over the last 50 or 60 years at least. It's my great pleasure to start off the podcasts with a chat with Andreas Voss, distinguished researcher in infection prevention control and antimicrobial resistance. Andreas, we've known each other a long time, and I've certainly got lots of questions for you. But do you want to start the ball rolling by talking about your earliest influences and highlights and inspirations?
Thanks for having me. And yes, I would like to start out then with talking about my time in Germany, where I did my schooling and my university times. And then right after university started in OBGYN, but due to certain circumstances landed in clinical microbiology. And the nice thing is that my mentor at that time was Ilya Braveny. And for those being familiar with ESCMID, the European Society of Clinical Microbiology Infectious Disease, Ilya was one of the co-founders of that society, and he truly took me under his wings and showed me the ropes and sent me to all his friends all around Europe and the US to convince me to leave OBGYN behind and take the switch to clinical microbiology. And he did that very successful. So that's how I ended up getting my training in clinical microbiology at the Klinikum Rechts der ISA, which is part of one of the universities in Munich, Germany, and did my education there with, as I mentioned, lots of travels to all of his ESCMID friends around the world.
And what were the main highlights of these early formative years?
I mean, the highlight was really that the reason he wanted to keep me actually was to build up infection control. So he sent me to a lot of people who know more about that. And one of my highlights really was a visit to Steve Zinner in Boston, where for the first time ever I heard about MRSA, only they call it their MRSA. And I came back to Munich after a few weeks at Boston and Providence, and looked into our department, and we didn't even knew MRSA in Germany at that time. So it was all just a staff. So by that, it was amazing, because now I suddenly started to go into the topic of MRSA, did a German surveillance study, did the first European surveillance study on MRSA. The first time we showed this nice maps with the green in the north and the red in the south. And this is how I started my research on MRSA. And I think that was one of the most important things, which was only possible because Braveny really got me into contact with all the people within Europe. So that was one of the best and the nicest things. And the other part was that I really had to learn a little bit of ID service, because at that time in Germany, clinical microbiologist was a pure lab-based job. No one actually looked after patients. There were no visits to units. There was nothing like that. And it was great to starting that out. And again, I was taught by people like Stephen Dinner and others what it actually means to see patients, and I had to work on that regard, which was really good, certainly when you also want to start a program of antimicrobial stewardship. I have to say that I wasn't very successful on that while I was a resident in microbiology, because the head of the ICU, also a surgeon, told me very clearly that I'm not allowed to change all of his patients away from imipenem, because that was the best he could do for his patients, and he does not like any young doctor to mingle with his antibiotic policies, if you want to call it a policy.
Well, hopefully that sort of attitude amongst intensivists is one for the history books. Just to clarify, we're talking there what early 80s?
Yeah, and we're talking mid 80s, yes,
Mid 80s.
86 to 88 in that area. Yeah.
So how did that early experience influence your research?
I was lucky enough to meet a lot of colleagues all over Europe so early on, while still being a fellow and still being in training, because Parveni sent me anywhere. I remember his famous word that I can't do a lot, but I can talk pretty well and give talks. So he sent me to give his talks all over Europe because he wasn't so keen on traveling. And thereby I had my own network. I was able to do studies. I got to know people. I was able to see what they do in their labs and in their hospitals. And I think it was for me, I got a clear idea about clinical microbiology is not a lab-based. It might be lab-based, but it does not really work if you not go out, see your clinical colleagues, work on the intensive care unit, work with them on the hematology units and other risk units. So that was important. And also, he brought me in contact with other of his friends who have a nice grant to give away. It was Franz Daschner, one of the most famous infection control people in Germany. And I was able to, via the Walter Marget Foundation, which they had built for their mentor, to go to the US. And all this was made possible really by my educator, Ilya Praveni. And so he made sure that I would be able to go to the US to Dick Wenzel, who at that time was kind of the Pope in infection control.
Dick Wenzel was based where, and who else did you meet in the States?
And in 1992, 1993, he was based in Iowa City. So it's in the middle of nowhere, you could say, but a great hospital with amazing people working there. And due to to the fact that he was that famous, we were like about 16 fellows from around the world that came there together there and learned from Dick Wenzel. And he was an amazing teacher, and not only contents wise, but also showing us how you can actually treat your fellows or people working with you. So he was making sure we got a bike, he was making sure we had a bed to sleep, he was inviting us for barbecues into his home, and he was altogether an extremely pleasant man who really taught you from you do not have to act like a general and giving commands, but you can convince people by just showing them what you know and treating them well. So that was for me a true eye opener because that was not within the German hierarchical system. Because, like at the beginning of this interview, I was talking about Ilya. I would have never dared to do that for the man. I worked at least 12 hours a day, 6 days a week, because it was for all the time Professor Braveni, because that was the only way I would have talked to him. So they're very different in the US.
Indeed, in those late 80s, early 90s, my recollections too would have been that the US was the center of the earth in terms of the leading research in the fields that you and I are interested in. Do you agree with that? And how did Europe gain in the ascendancy in the following 20 years?
Yeah, it's true. At that time, the most important title you could have was not the professor or the doctor, but was the AIG, which is a German translation for was in America. So if you could say I was in America, you have obviously done something well. And I would say that they were really leading. They had the most research. They had the most famous researchers at that time too. They were sharing that really well on all the big meetings. The Society of Healthcare Epidemiology of America, SHEA, was the leading society, and their journal was certainly the leading journal in infection control. So what happened is that a lot of Europeans came there. Dick Wenzel was able to bring them all together and to keep them together. So we started with a team called the Friends of Iowa. People I worked with a lot, like Andreas Wittmer and Didier Pité, were just there before me with a little overlap. And that really became a tight group of friends and colleagues who worked together and had this kind of American way of working, namely hard and a lot and publish and work together. And I think that helped to change the world, or of infection control at least, and bring Europe forward. Like, I stole the idea of the Shea hospital epidemiology course. They had this course in hospital epidemiology, held in five-star hotels, at least for the faculty. The faculty flew in for give the lecture, flew out. But we thought we'd do it differently, more European based. We do it low key, with all the faculty staying together for 5 days with the people who came to the course. And I think we built an extremely successful course that way, that run for 20 years before it gave it over to younger people. And then things in Europe changed. Infection control became more sexy, because when I started out with it, no one wanted to do it. But it became far more sexy over the years. People got far more engaged, and we saw how important it is for healthcare. So I think that was the main reason how Europe suddenly ended up in coming into infection control and having more interest for it.
And how much of a role did ISAC, previously known as ISC, and ESCMID have? Of course, ISAC being a much older organization than ESCMID.
True, ISAC is in this far older, and later on they also joined this ESCMID Shea course. I have to admit that in the very beginning, with regard to infection control, ESCMID was a little bit more proactive, or the working groups were very active. I was part of a small group together with Emilio Busa from Spain, who reactivated the European study group on nosocomial infections from ESCMID. And we did that very successfully. And by combining all that, it really helped. On top of that, with those friends of Iowa, we started later on the meeting, which now is one of the top meetings in infection control, ICPIC, which is in Geneva. And we also started a journal, which I was founding editor and editor-in-chief for several years, which now is a top journal also within infection control. So I believe at that time it was mainly activity from friends, not supported by societies. But you see it now. ESCMID started with UKIC, pouring a lot of money into that. And ISSC has now a very active working group on infection control too, which I also happened to lead for some time. And I'm very happy to see that we're now also working together. There's so much to offer. So like the webinars we now to ISIC is now doing with ESCMID together, they're really great. And I believe it really helps not to offer more and more, but to bring the best from all societies together and then have just excellent webinars.
We've mentioned your experiences in America and Europe, but of course there's a whole wide world out there, another 4 inhabited continents. Do you think the world of infection and antimicrobial resistance and stewardship has dealt fairly with these other continents?
Fairly is difficult to say. I have been also for a short time on the African Board for Infection Control, ICANN, on that society, which was a pleasure to work with, and which, by the way, has way better connections with ISIC than with ESCMID. So that I think that was one of the strong points of ISIC, of course, was the fact that they had great connections in Africa, great connections all over Asia, which is also extremely important. And I have traveled to a lot of the Asian countries during my ISIC time, obviously, and giving talks on infection control and talking to leaders in the field there, and opening a completely different view on the subject. So yes, I believe that it's a world we did not look at for a long time, but I have to say that the advancements within infection control, maybe with the exception of Hong Kong and Singapore, was in most Asian countries and Africa, of course, very, very different to what was going on in the US and in Europe at that time.
And looking back on a distinguished research career, what are your main papers that you're proudest of?
Yeah, the one I already mentioned that was the MRSA survey, because that was done way before there was any European surveillance system or any surveillance system around the globe. Another one I did together with Andreas Voss, and as every great ideas, it came during a meeting at night in a bar after a few beers, when we decided which good arguments could we have to show people that hand washing is literally impossible and they should all switch to hand rubbing with bedside alcohol. So the paper, No Time for Hand Washing, while it is not a major research because it was very, very easy, a simple idea, but it is a very, very impactful idea. To stay with MRSA, I believe that our detection of livestock-associated MRSA, SD398, and everything that follows from there, because also it was not only MRSA within livestock, but also other multi-drug resistant organisms. And I think those were very important too. I would say that those my top three papers are around that.
You've mentioned in glowing terms the benefits of going to international congresses in terms of contacts and liaising and bringing home good ideas. What are your best memories in particular of ISAC meetings, but also of other international conference highlights?
Yeah, number one, I should say I'm a big defender of face-to-face meetings, because I believe there's a lot of things you can do online, but to really get to know your colleagues and become friends and really have good exchange, you also need the social contact during those meetings. If I think about top meetings, number one, I would mention the joint ISAC ICAC meeting, which obviously was a great success and was wonderful to be part of it and being actively engaged while being there and in the preparation of the meeting. I should say that I liked the ESCMID, a former ESCMID in Munich, where I happened to be the program director, which was for me personal, as it was my hometown, kind of a very exciting meeting. And maybe during a decennial meeting in Atlanta, when all the infection control people come once in the 10 years come together. I had the year in infection control with Bob Weinstein. I think we had at least 7, 8 of those together in the US. But during that meeting were so good that people in the end commented if the organizers had hired actors and comedians to give this 1 hour presentation. So we had an amazing time. And I think Bob Weinstein enjoyed it very much too. In opposite to the first time we did it together, he even created a disclaimer slide to say that he had no influence over my slides and there's nothing to do with it. But that changed over the years and we really became a great team.
You've practiced medicine through the latter part of what we often call the golden age of antimicrobial chemotherapy. What are your most notable memories of that? And do you think we can ever achieve another golden age?
It were really amazing times. And it could not only because a lot of new antibiotics and later on antimycotics and others came to the market, a lot of opportunities for research. It was new drugs, whereas now I have the feeling it's more like a Me Too product than a totally new class. Infectious disease were hot. People really liked it, whereas at the present time, and COVID might not helped, COVID showed for a short time that we are needed, infectious diseases and infection control. But people are now, they don't like to see us anymore, in my opinion. A lot of things change now. So I don't think the golden era is over. We can tell all the politicians that there is a silent pandemic of antimicrobial resistance, and they will repeat it during their G8 and G6 and whatever meetings they have. But they are not, in my opinion, not really acting on it. So I think that all those in our beloved field having way more difficult expertise over the future. And I believe in the future, it will still always be needed. There will always be people needed who know about infectious disease, who know about good ways of treating it, and who to diagnose it and to prevent it. So that the skill set that will not be replaced by AI or anything else. We need good communicators who are able to get in contact with their clinical colleagues or who are clinical in part themselves. And so it will always be needed. But the golden ages where there was tons of money from the industry flowing our way and tons of grants, I mean, those are over. It'll be more a fight to do what is needed.
You don't think that AI might help in a new era of antimicrobial discovery?
There already are the first drugs under development that are detected or that were composed, I should say, using AI. So we know about that. They are in clinical phase studies already, at least one I know of, not for infectious diseases, but for heart disease. So it will help in the drug discovery, but we also know how extremely expensive it became to develop new drugs. And why would you use an antibiotic? Then you have people like me who are telling everyone, put it somewhere away and use it when there's really nothing else to be used. And so we put them away in a safe while the company can't earn the money they invested in it. And when we finally use them, they probably can be produced by others too. So it's not a very attractive drug to produce. If you're lucky, you can treat someone for 3 to 6 months, but that is an absolute maximum, and usually it's a few days. I believe that, yes, there will be new drugs. We will be winning or stay winning the race against antimicrobial resistance. The golden ages where there was one new antibiotic after the other, and we could test them and we could do clinical studies, and we were traveling all over the world on costs of pharma industry. And I believe that's a good thing that is over. But, it was certainly fun, but it will not be the same anymore as it used to be in the 80s and the early 90s.
Intensive care physicians of your youth that you mentioned who were addicted to imipenem prescribing, you and I believe that they do not exist anymore in Europe, perhaps, or in some excellent centers worldwide. But I still have my suspicions that in the darkest areas of practice around the world, these habits die very slowly, if at all.
Oh, I know for sure because I remember that I gave a talk in a not mentioned here Eastern European country on antimicrobial stewardship, and people told me later on it was very interesting but completely stupid because I mean they of course gave the newest and most expensive drugs for antimicrobial prophylaxis because they sold it to their patients and that was the highest and best income they had. So no, but in usually like in the Netherlands, we know for in the Netherlands, Germany, and most of the European countries, luckily, intensivists are very, very different. And in my opinion, I'm sitting here in Nijmegen, where Jeroen Schouten is probably one of the most active and also excellent people in antimicrobial stewardship. He's an intensivist, a very good one. So no, things changed luckily. A lot of our clinical colleagues now know the value of good clinical microbiology, so good diagnostics, good prevention, and good treatment.
Just to finish, final thoughts on some aspect of MRSA, which I was intrigued, appeared on a website chat only yesterday with a well-known microbiologist in UK pontificating whether we shouldn't just forget that MRSA is different from ordinary Staph aureus, MSSA, and just treat them as the same in the future. Kind of the argument that people like Richard Lacey had back in the 1970s. Any final thoughts to
Yeah,
close the
I
podcast?
think this is a very dangerous idea. We know it's not the same. Vancomycin and flucloxacillin or a good cephalosporin, cefazolin, do not have the same effect against MRSA. So vancomycin is far less active in treating the patient, has far more side effects. So the idea of letting it go, and thereby we know it's increasing, is not a good idea. We also know from old UK data that MRSA is not only a replacement, but frequently in addition to the existing susceptible Staph aureus. So there's a nice paper from Bonton and Kleitmans and others who reported those. And yeah, I think it's a very bad idea. We did this a little bit with amoxicillin resistant, or with amoxicillin resistance in enterococci, and let go. And now it's a problem that you cannot get rid of anymore. So no, I don't like it. If you know it is a multi-drug resistant organism, you should fight it as long as you can. You can obviously go ahead and ask, how far do you need to go? What is the most efficient way to fight it? But to just let go, as long as I have any influence on infection control, I will fight it. I wouldn't say to my death, but to my to the end of my active involvement in clinical micro and infection control.
Indeed. One can never turn one's back. Immediately you do things revert to previous bad behavior of our colleagues.
Yeah.
Andreas Voss, it's been a great pleasure to speak to you, and thank you very much for
Thank you,
giving
Ian,
us your
and
time.
have a great day.